About 7 years ago, when I was 17, my parents went out of town for the weekend and left me at home. That wasn't unusual. They trusted me, and most of the time I didn't actually stay there alone anyway. Their house has always had this strange empty feeling when no one else is around, even in the middle of the day, so I usually ended up staying with friends or family. Our town is tiny, the kind of rural place where everyone recognizes everyone, and nothing much ever happens. That Saturday, the plan was to stay with a friend, but her parents changed their minds at the last second and said I couldn't stay. It wasn't a huge shock. They were known for randomly deciding things like that. So I headed out around 9:30 or so. The drive to my parents' house was only about 15 minutes, but on the way, I suddenly got this strong feeling that I really didn't want to go home by myself. It wasn't panic, just a heavy sense of dread that didn't make sense. I called my brother and asked if I could sleep at his place. At the time, he lived with a woman who had a young kid, and he said it would be easier for him to just meet me at our parents' house instead. His dog would go crazy if I tried to come in. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. For context, my brother is a pretty intimidating guy. Tall, muscular, covered in tattoos. Just someone you wouldn't want to argue with. Since I'd have some time to kill, I stopped at a gas station to grab a snack. The parking lot was nearly empty, which was normal for our town after dark. As I walked up to the door, a man standing outside smoking opened it for me without saying a word. That kind of politeness wasn't unusual, so I just smiled and thanked him. Inside, another man was standing near the entrance, and the second I walked in, I noticed him staring. He gave me this slow, gross once-over and said something along the lines of, "Hey sexy, what are you doing alone?" I ignored him and headed toward the back of the store. He yelled after me and called me a bitch, but I kept walking. I figured he was drunk or just the kind of person who liked being loud for attention. I bought my stuff and headed back toward the door. When I came outside, both men were gone, which was honestly a relief. I started walking toward my car, parked a good distance away, and looked down at my phone to see if enough time had passed for my brother to arrive. When I looked up, the guy who had yelled at me was standing by the pumps, staring right at me. I glanced at him and kept walking. He said something like, "You know you're supposed to answer a man when he talks to you." I muttered something sarcastic without really thinking and got into my car. He looked irritated, and I immediately locked the doors, turned the car on, and was focused on getting home. Before pulling out, I looked around the lot and realized both men were now sitting in a car facing mine. They were staring directly at me, talking to each other, occasionally pointing. We just looked at each other for a moment, and then the guy who'd opened the door earlier slid his finger across his throat like he was making some kind of threat. I rolled my eyes, backed out, and pulled onto the road. Unfortunately, they pulled out right behind me. Up until that point, I hadn't been scared, but when they kept following me, reality hit. To see if they were actually tailing me, I took a few back roads that loop around in a circle. They stayed right behind me. When they realized I was testing them, they sped up and got so close to my bumper that their headlights disappeared from my rearview mirror, and they started blaring the horn. I called my brother and told him what was happening. He told me to drive straight home and that he'd take care of it. I headed toward the house, still being chased, and within a few minutes, I turned onto my parents' road. As I slowed down to pull into the driveway, I felt this huge wave of relief. At the end of the driveway, my brother was standing there shirtless, shoulders squared, holding a pistol against his stomach, and his pit bull sitting right beside him. I drove into the yard. The car behind me started to follow, but the second they saw my brother standing there like that, they spun the car around and took off. I really don't know what their plan was, or what would have happened if I'd stopped somewhere isolated or kept driving. But I'll never forget seeing my brother waiting there like he was already prepared for whatever came next. I'm still grateful he showed up when he did. Last night turned into something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. For context, I'm a 19-year-old guy living in a mid-sized city in Ontario, and this started out like any normal night. I finished a late workout at the gym around 11 and swung by the grocery store to grab food for the next couple of days. While I was checking out, I got $120 cash back, money I owed my mom, and stuffed it in my wallet without thinking much of it. Instead of heading straight home, I decided to take my car out for a drive. It's still pretty new to me, and I've been enjoying learning stick, so I just cruised around for about half an hour before deciding to call it a night. On the way back, I passed a gas station near the edge of town, close to my place, and figured I might as well fill up. When I pulled in, the lot was empty. This part of the city is mostly industrial, so everything's dark and quiet at that hour. I noticed an SUV parked off in an unlit lot beside the station, far enough away that I didn't think twice about it. I got out, started fueling up, and out of nowhere I saw a woman round the corner and start walking straight toward me. The way she moved instantly put me on edge. She was walking fast, hands shoved in her pockets, staring directly at me. Without even thinking, I reached back and locked my car. She stopped in front of me and said, in this rough, raspy voice, "I got in a fight with my boyfriend and he left me here. Can you give me a ride to my mom's house?" Before I could even react, she repeated it almost word for word in the exact same tone, like she'd rehearsed it. I told her I needed to finish pumping gas. She didn't respond to that. She just walked over to the passenger side of my car and grabbed the door handle. "Can you unlock your car? I'm cold. I've been here a while." I told her I needed to go pay for the gas. I cut the fill short and went inside, thinking maybe she was high or drunk and just being strange. I mentioned to the cashier that she was acting weird and that I didn't know her, but he didn't seem interested in getting involved. So I went back out, thinking I'd just get in my car and leave. As I stepped outside, I heard an engine start. It was the SUV from earlier. I watched it shift into position near the exit, still far back but clearly running. She was still beside my car. "Can you open the door now? I'm really cold." Up close, she looked rough. Her clothes were decent enough, but her face told a different story. Heavy makeup that didn't really hide a sore on her lip, sunken eyes with this blank, checked-out look. And nothing about her voice matched the story she was telling. No panic, no sadness, just this flat, emotionless tone. I told her no again, more firmly. She didn't back off. "Come on, you're driving me home, right?" I told her I had to get home. That's when I realized my phone was still inside the car, which only made everything feel worse. She suddenly raised her voice. "I'm cold. I've been out here for hours." But the anger in it didn't match someone asking for help. She glanced toward the SUV like she was checking in with it. Something clicked in my head, and I just snapped. I raised my voice and told her to back off. The second I did, she stepped away like she wasn't expecting that reaction. Then she said calmly, "You better get out of here right now then," and started backing up toward the dark lot. That line hit harder than anything else that night. It was like she dropped the whole act in one sentence. I got in my car and took off fast. I turned into a random neighborhood just to see if anyone was following me and to catch my breath. Once I felt like I was clear, I called the police. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but since nothing technically happened, there wasn't much they could do. The officer did say it sounded like a setup, and that driving away was the right call. I headed home after that, trying to shake the whole thing off, but the more I replay it, the creepier it feels. The way she talked, how she went straight for my door handle, the SUV waiting in the shadows, and how quickly she dropped the helpless act once she knew I wasn't going along with it. I've been jumped before, but this felt so calculated and predatory that it stuck with me in a different way. That one sentence keeps replaying in my head. "You better get out of here right now then." It's the way she said it, like she already knew what was supposed to happen next. I was 16 at the time, pretty small, about 5'1" and around 130 pounds, and the kind of person who never really stood out anywhere. I wasn't shy with people I knew, but out in public, especially if I was by myself, I tended to stay quiet and get things done without drawing attention. My house was close to a convenience store, and my mom and I stopped there several times a week for gas or snacks, so it was just a normal, familiar place. Nothing about it ever felt strange until these few weeks happened, starting toward the end of January and stretching into February. There was a clerk who worked there, and before all of this, I barely even noticed him. I was usually in and out in a minute or two, paying and leaving. The first time he spoke to me, it caught me off guard because he started cracking random little jokes while I was paying. They weren't inappropriate, just silly comments, and I laughed politely and left. I didn't think twice about it. Over the next few days, it kept happening. He'd greet me, ask basic questions, talk about the weather, normal stuff. But something about the way he tried to hold the conversation felt like he was trying to learn more about me. I couldn't explain it, but the tone had shifted from casual to personal, and it put this strange pressure on me to respond, even though I didn't want to. One day I went in alone again, and I had to grab a bunch of things for my mom, so I was wandering around the aisles longer than usual. As I was walking, I got this sense that someone was watching me. When I looked around, everyone else was minding their own business, but then my eyes met his. He wasn't doing anything except staring, with this expression that made me tense up right away. It wasn't a friendly look, and it didn't feel like he was just keeping an eye on customers. It was something else, focused and unsettling. As soon as another customer came in, he turned away like nothing happened, and I tried to shake it off. I stalled a little, hoping another cashier might be up front, but no one appeared, and I eventually had to take my things to him. He went right back into talking, dragging out the interaction, commenting on what I was buying, asking if I was having some kind of party, joking about whether I got anything for him. I tried to keep my answers short, but he moved slowly on purpose, stretching out the moment. When he gave me the total in this weird, playful voice, I handed over the money, and he kept trying to make eye contact the whole time. When I finally looked away, he didn't. He stared straight at me while handing over the change. When I walked out, I saw him reflected in the glass behind me, still watching. Physically, he was a large guy, not just big, but bulky in a way that made him seem hard to ignore. He had a heavy stomach, tattoos on his neck, and writing across his fingers. He looked older, definitely way older than me, maybe even older than my dad. And I couldn't wrap my head around why someone like that was focusing on a 16-year-old girl who wasn't doing anything to invite attention. I didn't dress flashy, didn't talk about myself, and didn't act like someone trying to stand out. The only noticeable thing about me was how short I was. One night close to 10, my family stopped by the store before heading home. When we pulled into the parking lot, I saw him outside talking to another man. I hadn't told my parents anything about what had been happening, but sitting there in the car, I felt this tight panic build up. The idea of walking past him without the counter between us made me freeze for a moment. I wanted to ask my dad to go in with me, but I couldn't get the words out, and I didn't want to explain everything right there, so I forced myself to get out and go inside. As soon as he noticed me, he smiled and held the door open. I muttered a thank you and tried to get past him quickly. He followed just a few steps behind me, but it was enough to make my nerves spike. I moved farther into the store, putting as much space between us as possible. He kept watching me, waiting for me to come to the register like he always did. Luckily, another clerk was working the counter that night, so I went straight to him instead. When I left, I caught his reflection again in the window. This time his expression was different, almost angry, like he was annoyed I hadn't spoken to him. As we drove away, I glanced toward the back lot where employees parked, and there were only 2 cars, a white Dodge and a small green Jeep. The next morning, when my mom and I were leaving our neighborhood, a white Dodge passed us, and in the brief moment we crossed paths, I saw him behind the wheel. That confirmed he lived close enough to be in the area, which made everything feel even worse. A few weeks later, my mom needed gas early before taking me to school, and I had to go inside again. I was dressed normally, nothing unusual, but the second I walked in, he lit up like he'd been waiting for me. He stared the whole time I paid, and I rushed out before he could start talking. When I got back in the car, I finally managed to say something. My voice was shaking when I asked my mom if we could stop going to that store. At first, she laughed, thinking I was joking, but when I explained what had been happening, her whole expression changed. She got quiet, gripping the steering wheel hard while she listened. When she dropped me off at school, she told me it would be taken care of by the time I got out. Telling someone made me feel like a weight had lifted. Looking back, it might not seem huge to some people, but at 16, being watched and followed around by a grown man like that made me dread every trip to that store, and it took a while before I felt comfortable going anywhere near it again. I was 23 when I finally left that gas station job, but at the time this happened I was barely 18. I'd only been working there a short while, in a pretty quiet suburban area in the deep south. Nothing wild ever really happened there, so most places didn't bother with any heavy safety rules beyond the basic training. Don't fight a robber, hand over the money, call the police afterward, that kind of thing. My manager, Sophia, also had an unofficial rule of never scheduling women for the overnight shifts. Those were always given to the guys. But one night I offered to stay later for some extra cash, and since I lived just a short walk away, I didn't think twice about it. It felt harmless enough. Something you'd have to see to understand is how quickly it gets dark down there. Once the sun drops, that's it. Pitch black, barely any streetlights, and the whole area gets quiet fast. My shift started like any normal night. I ran the register, did some cleaning, restocked shelves, swept a few times. Eventually you hit a point where there's really nothing left to do, so I hung around the counter, checking my phone between customers. Then the bell on the door rang and someone walked in. I looked up and saw a tall man who looked pretty rough, clothes wrinkled, hair messy. I put my phone away right away and asked if he needed help, but something about him felt off. Nothing obvious, just enough to make me notice. He asked where the restroom was, so I pointed him down the little hallway. To get there, you had to pass the registers and walk by our office and stockroom. He headed back there, and I stopped thinking about him pretty fast and went back to what I was doing. A little later, one of my regulars came in, a taller guy who had served in the Marines for over 20 years. We talked for a bit, just the usual small talk, when we both heard something fall in the back. It sounded like a broom or mop. He asked if I was working alone and offered to check it out for me. I told him no, mostly because I didn't want to get in trouble for letting a customer into an employee area. He said he'd be back later to buy lottery tickets, then left. Time went on, and eventually I needed to use the bathroom after drinking way too much from the soda fountain. I headed toward the hallway, and right as I got close, I noticed the office door was open more than it had been earlier. I couldn't explain why, but instead of walking in normally, I pushed the door open with my foot so it would swing wide enough to trigger the motion light. The light came on, and at first I didn't notice anything. Then I saw him, the same guy from earlier, standing perfectly still behind the door. He wasn't moving or talking, just watching me. We made brief eye contact, and I backed out of the hallway right away. A couple of seconds later, he stepped out of the office and walked straight out of the store, not saying a word, just staring at me the whole time until he disappeared from view. I called Sophia immediately and told her what happened, and she contacted the police. That's when I found out he had already been banned from every other store in the area for doing the same thing, sneaking into back rooms and hanging around. But since he hadn't technically done anything they could charge him for, he'd never been arrested. After that night, he started showing up at random times, not buying anything, just watching me from the aisles. Sometimes he wouldn't even come close to the counter. He'd just stand there looking at me until he felt like leaving. I never found out what he wanted or why he was hiding in that office. But the way he stood there long enough for the motion light to shut off on its own has stuck with me ever since. That summer wasn't supposed to be anything complicated. I had just ended a relationship, moved back in with my parents until school started in the fall, picked up full-time hours at a gas station about a mile from their house, and spent whatever free time I had joking around with old friends from my hometown. That was the whole plan, and for the first few weeks it was straightforward and pretty normal. I never noticed how many strange people came through that gas station until I was there every day. It was a nice suburb, nothing that felt unsafe, and we had a bunch of regulars who mostly kept to themselves. One of them was a guy in his late 30s who started doing small things to get my attention, waiting in my longer line even if others were open, lingering a bit longer to talk, things like that. At the time, I didn't read too much into it. I was 21, and because of my last relationship, I didn't think of myself as someone people were going out of their way to notice. I figured he was just overly friendly. But then it shifted. First, he only came to my register. Then he started showing up multiple times during a shift. He acted polite, well-spoken, and didn't give off any obvious warning signs. Sometimes he had his 2 tween daughters with him, which made him seem even less threatening to me. I still didn't think anything was wrong. I usually worked early mornings, but eventually my schedule flipped and I started closing more often. I've always been more awake at night anyway, so I didn't mind it. He, however, suddenly seemed irritated that my new hours didn't match up with his. He even mentioned that he couldn't come see me as often because he worked second shift. That was the first time I felt uncomfortable. I started avoiding him, ducking into the cooler if I saw his car pull up, pretending to be busy in the back, anything to avoid having to interact with him. Then he started hanging around near closing time. I would wait inside until he left, not wanting to walk to my car while he was outside. It escalated when I found notes and flowers left on my car. One night, as I was heading out, he stepped out from behind my vehicle like he had been waiting there. I backed up immediately and told him I wasn't interested in anything. He just smiled and said he would win me over eventually, like it was some sort of game. After that, I scrambled my schedule. Days, nights, mornings, anything to make it unpredictable. A couple weeks later, a woman came into the store with 2 younger girls. She walked straight up to the counter and started asking them if I was the girl. When they said yes, she started yelling at me to stay away from her husband. I was stunned. I tried to tell her I had no idea what she was talking about, but she just kept going. That's when I found out he was married and had been telling her he had a young girlfriend from the gas station who was supposedly moving in with him. The daughters looked embarrassed, and she wouldn't leave. Our store owner, who was watching on the security cameras, called the police, and they made her go. Around then, I had gone on a few dates with a guy who started checking in on me at night to make sure I wasn't walking out alone. Normally we had 2 people for closing shifts, but one night my coworker called in, so I was on my own. Somehow the stalker guy must have noticed, because he slipped in 10 minutes before closing and just stood around, talking like he was keeping me company. He started going on about how no girl should be alone that late, why I wouldn't give him a chance, how he could take care of me, buy me a car, move me into his house. I told him no, and mentioned that his wife didn't seem too happy about any of this either. That set him off. He started screaming, knocked over a display, demanding to know what I'd told her. I couldn't leave because my car was parked off to the side in the dark, and there was no way I was walking out there with him waiting. I just stayed behind the counter, staring at the clock, trying to keep distance between us. Right then, the guy I'd been seeing happened to drive by, noticed my car was still there, and came to check on me. As soon as he walked up to the door, the stalker saw him and stormed out without another word. My friend helped me clean up the mess, sat with me until I calmed down, and told me I needed to quit that job immediately. We called the police, and since it was a small town, it didn't take long for them to find the stalker driving around in his white Kia. The officer later told me he had a knife, rope, and duct tape with him. This happened last year, right around Christmas. when I was driving out to see my parents. I was going from Nashville, Tennessee to Kent Island, Maryland. Just me and my dog, Kona. She's a mix of pit bull, bulldog, husky, and lab, so she's a pretty solid dog. And for context, I'm a tall, fairly built guy myself. The drive is long, around 12 hours, and by the time I made it into Northern Virginia near Harrisonburg, I was worn out and Kona needed a bathroom break. I also needed gas, so I pulled into a station at about 10 p.m. I parked at a pump, got the gas going, left Kona in the car, and walked inside to grab something to eat and a Red Bull to keep myself awake. When I came back outside, I immediately noticed a thin, rough-looking man standing near my pump. As I got closer to my car, he spoke up and told me he was homeless and needed extra clothing because of the cold. I felt bad for him, but all I had in the truck were wrapped presents for my family and a small amount of clothes for myself. I apologized, told him I couldn't help with clothes, and wished him luck. He pointed out that he saw boxes in the back of my vehicle and said anything would help. I explained again that I didn't have clothes to give, but I did offer him the food I had just bought inside. He turned it down. His attitude changed fast. He started getting irritated and then asked if he could have the coat I was wearing. It was a heavy pea coat that my mom had given me as a graduation gift, so I told him no, that I needed it. That set him off. He started yelling, accusing me of being spoiled and living off my parents, which wasn't true, but the way he said it caught me off guard. Kona had moved up into the driver's seat and was staring at him through the window. He suddenly stepped closer, put a hand on my shoulder, and moved in until he was about a foot away from me. His other hand stayed in his pocket, and he said louder this time that he needed my help. The whole situation shifted from awkward to threatening in a matter of seconds. At that point, Kona completely lost it, barking nonstop inside the truck, loud enough that he clearly heard her. He looked over at her, and I told him very directly to leave me alone right then, or I'd open the door and let my dog handle it. I meant it, and he could tell. That finally made him back off. As soon as he put some distance between us, I opened the door, got into the truck, and pushed Kona back into the passenger side so I could sit down. She was still worked up, and I waited until he was far enough away before putting the pump back and getting ready to leave. As I drove past the side of the gas station, I saw him again, climbing into the passenger seat of a black SUV like someone had been waiting for him the whole time. I didn't stick around to think about it. I had planned on grabbing Kona a big steak somewhere down the road as a thank you for reacting the way she did. But a few minutes later, she ended up using the bathroom in the truck. So I'm guessing the whole thing rattled her too.